Good morning, good morning. It's another hot and sultry day here in South Georgia. And today we're talking about one of my favorite things, anvils. Nothing says awesome blacksmithiness like an anvil. It has been the perennial symbol of the trade, and they're just awesome. That's the only thing to say about them. But buying an anvil has, it's almost like been like riding a roller coaster in the past couple of years because of Forged in Fire. And I wanted to do a quick overview of what that has meant and where we are and what you're looking for if you're going out to buy your very own new anvil or new-ish anvil. So, quick recap. Anvil prices have been relatively steady up until Forged in Fire for, time immemorial. When I was in Andersonville and I was really, getting into the craft and working with Jay, the average price for a good steel or wrought iron anvil was about $2 a pound. That was our starting point. Now, if it was cast iron, you're going to be lucky if I give you 50% or 50%, 50 cents a pound on that end. So here's the deal. Well, we're going to get into that in just a minute. Let me pause myself before I chase that particular rabbit. So that was the way it has been for a very long time. And then Forged in Fire came along. And Forged in Fire had a profound effect on the secondary market for anvils and things of that nature. So many people were getting into the craft that you saw it reflected in the price of anvils. And so whereas previously $2 a pound was a good starting place for a quality anvil, suddenly that was left in the dust. Reasonable quality steel and wrought iron anvils were bringing $5 and $6 a pound, which is actually in the territory of new ductile cast anvils, which that was insanity. And the other thing, and this is what really just drove me up the wall, is the fact that cast iron anvils that are absolutely inferior in quality were bringing the same price simply because people didn't know the difference. So there was a lot of people that got jabbed right up the porthole when they bought a cast iron anvil for that price and not a good solid or wrought. So that has been going on for the past 5 or 6 years. I don't know how long that's been. I think it's been 5 or 6 years. I was on Forged in Fire, and even I don't know when I was on Forged in Fire. So it's been a minute. But the market is now cooling. If you look on Facebook Marketplace or eBay, prices are coming down rapidly. In fact, what you're seeing is a flood of blacksmithing related equipment out there on eBay. So if you're ever in the market for starter kits, man, now is the time. I see power hammers and anvils and forges, and they all smell of regret. But I don't think it's actually set in for most people. I saw a big blue hammer. I've seen several big blue hammers on the market. Even the bigger ones like the 115s, and they are making a very desperate bid to sell these things for what they paid for them. And I have terrible news for these poor people. Terrible news for these poor people. Okay. All right. So let's say we're now fast forward to this cooling period. And, what am I saying about buying yourself an anvil? All right. So now that prices have stabilized, here's the deal. As a general rule, $2 a pound for a wrought or steel anvil in reasonable shape is still in the ballpark. Probably a little bit low at this point, but for figuring purposes, that's kind of where I would be. If you got a good wrought iron or steel anvil for $2 a pound in reasonable shape, you came out well. So let's just put it that's in the green zone. Now, I keep making a big deal about this wrought iron and steel versus cast iron. And so for those of you that are new, let me make some differentiation. So here's the thing. Anvils have been made from several different materials over the course of time. Back before the 1860s and 1870s, almost all of your anvils are going to be made of wrought iron. Wrought iron is relatively soft. So at 18, what would happen is if you really used your anvil in an industrial fashion, the anvil would wallow out. It would actually just mush down, and you would spend a lot of time putting your anvil back in the fire and beating it back into shape. That happened very often. So in the 1840s, they figured out that if they would forge weld a steel plate to the top of the wrought iron, you could prevent so much of that wear and that wallowing. And so after 1840, almost all of your anvils are going to be wrought iron bases with a steel top. Okay? All right. These are quality anvils. Wrought iron is good stuff. It doesn't crack. The steel top plate, if done correctly, would last for a very, very long time. So these were good anvils. Problem is when you got into the Industrial Revolution, you had, because of something called the Bessemer process, you had a tremendous number of cast iron items that came out. In fact, there's a rather famous exchange between Samuel Yellen and one of the iron pourers in, I think, in New York. They could say they could really make his work look awesome, and they could do it cheaply. And I think Yellen gave them the business on that end of it, because we don't need no cheap-ass cast iron. It's the same thing with anvils. There were a lot of anvils that were made with cast iron. Now, they still had a steel plate that was put in place, but the cast iron was very prone to cracking. The plate was prone to cracking. It was just not... It was not a top-tier product. And a lot of those anvils were designed to go to the secondary market, you know, for the guys that is ordering through the Sears and Roebuck catalog. That's essentially the old days version of Amazon, boys and girls. There was a book that was like 3 inches thick, and you got it at your house, and you would order everything through this catalog, even houses, even wives sometimes. I wonder how that would work these days. Just flip it open there and make an order. What you feel like this evening? I'm kind of feeling Mexican. Anyway, so they were just not a great anvil to start with, and that's the way it's continued. Because these days, if you're going to find an anvil that's really screwed up, it's going to be a cast iron anvil. So if you're going out and you're looking for an antique anvil, the first thing you want to determine is it cast iron or is it steel or wrought iron? Simple way to do that is the ping test. As long as it's not locked down or there's a chain around it, if you tap it and it sounds dull, like you just tapped a dumbbell, that's going to be cast iron. If it has a pronounced ping, a ting of any sort on that end, that's going to be steel or wrought iron. And that's really the one that you want. Now, if you're in a pinch and you just need an anvil, get my grammar right, I mean, do what you got to do. But in general, if you're really going to be using a proper tool and it's going to be a long-term investment, you want an anvil that's either steel or wrought iron. Now, once you've ascertained that, the next question is, how much damage is there to the anvil? Now, if you're doing general blacksmithing, a little bit of edge chipping, edges rolled over, you know, a little bit of wallow in that top plate, not going to hurt a thing. Man, the number of anvils I have seen that have had some pitting or some dummy that decided to use an arc welder on top of it, these are all things that happen over the course of these anvils' lives. The only thing you really have to watch out for is something that's got excessive damage to the top plate. Is the top plate cracked? Is there a piece of the top plate missing? Now, if you get into that, now you've got problems, because if you've got a chunk of top plate missing, you've got a real issue you got to get around, and that's going to be a costly repair of some flavor. So that needs to be taken into account, you know, on your purchase price. Okay. So, once you've got all of that, if everything is reasonable, that's where you start negotiating on your price on that end of it. If it's in really good shape, $3 a pound. If it's so-so, I'd push back towards $2. And, you know, as far as size goes, bigger is always better, just flat out. One of the reasons, so a lot of the older cast iron, and there were some big cast iron anvils back in the day. I think Fisher Norris had 1,000-pound version, or there was some even bigger, I think, at the World Trade Show back in 1901. No, I think it was $18.99. I can't remember. But anyway, they had a big exhibition, and they had some huge anvils set up. Those anvils tend to last because they're so darn big. If you've got an average size, 130, 140 pound anvil, and it's on the farm, and you've got Jed and the first reader, with the sledgehammer going to town on it, and somebody misses, there's just not enough mass there to protect it from the damaging effect of that sledgehammer. And that's why they usually just fly to pieces, because what a steel and wrought iron anvil can do, you really kind of need twice the mass of a cast iron anvil to sufficiently resist the damaging effects of the hammer. So that's one of the reasons they don't last. Now, again, for you, if you're going to be making little bitty knives and you're going to be, giving it the little hit, again, no problem. Just understand that one's designed for long-term work and one's kind of a jobber tool. Now, if you have just gone off the deep end and you want to get a brand new spanking anvil, I'm going to cover just real briefly. I want to cover what your options are on there. So sitting in the firm middle of the spectrum are going to be a lot of your Farrier anvils. If you go to NC Tool, any of your Farrier supplies, you will see these anvils. They are made from something called ductile cast. They are still a cast iron, but they're a much higher grade of cast iron. I mean, the casting can be moved. It doesn't crack like the old cast iron, thus the term ductile cast. They have a steel plate on top of them, and they are very serviceable anvils. We don't tend to use them in the blacksmithing community because these anvils are generally very light. They are designed to be light. In fact, there's some of the anvils that actually have an aluminum base. Go figure that out, because for most of your farriers, what's happening is they're going into the field and they are lugging this anvil from the back of the truck to the stand and back and forth. So these anvils are not designed for heavy forge use. They're really more designed for shaping of shoes, things of that nature. But they're going to start you about $5, $6 a pound. And again, very serviceable, but not great for what we do, because at the end of the day, a good blacksmithing anvil is about mass under the hammer, and I've got a whole other rant about that we'll get into in another video. So that's going to be $5 at $6 a pound. But if you are a trust fund kid, if you are in your 30s, an attractive woman and a trust fund kid and really dig blacksmithing, my phone number is 229. No, by the way. If you are just a trust fund kid or you really want to bust out and go nuts, that's where you're going to actually buy one of the new modern anvils. And guys, here's the thing. The new anvils that are cast in things like 4140 or, God forbid, H13 or chromoly steel are so far beyond durable, it's a little scary. I mean, our other anvils lasted for 150, 200 years. These damn things will be here long after the cockroaches have died. Nimbus Anvils is, of course, an American manufacturer that's here. And then you've got, of course, in German, you've got several European anvils that are out there that are still being manufactured. I don't think that outside of Nimbus, I don't think there's an American manufacturer that's making those type of high-end anvils, but I digress. They are top of the line, and you're going to pay through the top of your nose for these things, because a lot of these are going to start at $11 or $12 a pound. So they are incredibly expensive on that end. And again, unless you have hit the lottery, nobody needs an anvil of that particular quality, even my particular self. But they are awesome, and I do covet them, and I do lust after them late at night. It's just the way it is. So guys, that should be your helpful 15-minute hint on how to find yourself an anvil. Again, if you have further questions, make sure and leave them below. You guys know I am going through there and answering those comments. They are what's driving the SteelCast. So, outside of that, guys, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for joining us on the SteelCast, and I will catch you guys a little bit later.